Hello everybody, and welcome to another Biology with Miss Judd. So far in Unit 2, we've talked about mitosis and we've talked about meiosis and how these create new cells, some of them body cells, some of them gametes or sex cells. All of this is a type of reproduction, a creation of an offspring, whether that's one cell creating a new offspring or if that is an adult creating a child. Reproduction is the process that organisms take to give rise to offspring. Lots of different organisms use different strategies for producing their offspring. Most strategies fall neatly into two categories, either sexual or asexual reproduction. Asexual generates offspring that are genetically identical to a single parent. So one parent basically clones itself and creates an offspring that is identical to it. In sexual reproduction, two parents contribute genetic information to produce a completely unique offspring. That is how you look different than your parents. Both sexual and asexual reproduction have advantages and disadvantages, which is why some organisms even go through both. We are going to handwrite our notes like we always do. We want to use our brains as best as possible, so make sure you have that next to you while Miss Judd in the corner walks us through these two types of reproduction. Hi guys, Miss Judd in the corner here to talk about asexual and sexual reproduction. In this, we are going to talk about the different types of asexual reproduction, budding, fragmentation, and fission, and then compare that to mitosis, what's going on with that. And then we're going to talk about sexual reproduction with gametogenesis, meiosis, and fertilization. And then we're going to wrap by comparing the two together, just to give you an idea of where we're headed today. All right, so we're going to start off with asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is when there's no fusion of gametes. So it's self-reproduction. It's when one organism creates an offspring that is identical to that organism. And we have three types. We have budding, which is when a new organism develops as an outgrowth. We have fragmentation, which is when a new organism develops from a removed piece of the parent. So if something breaks off, that piece that broke off will become a new offspring. And then we have fission, which is when a cell divides into two identical daughter organisms. Now you are going to, in your notes, write these definitions and then also match the word to the picture in your notes. Now, disclaimer, be careful, they don't go directly across. So you need to figure out which picture matches which word. So what's the difference between binary fission and mitosis? Because it looks like things are just dividing like mitosis does. And in this case, with binary fission, we have prokaryotes versus mitosis happens in eukaryotes. We have new DNA in both, but because fission happens in prokaryotes, it does not have a nucleus, so there is no nucleus. Remember that eukaryotic cells are the ones that have these organelles, so that means that there's a new nucleus that forms. They both do end up with two daughter cells, but in this case, it's a prokaryotic cell. That's fission, versus mitosis is eukaryotic cells. All right, so let's learn by practicing. What are some advantages to sexual reproduction? What kind of organisms participate in this? And some main advantages here is that one, they don't need a mate, right? It's just one organism producing an offspring. Two, it's a lot faster because you just create your offspring, especially binary fission when it's a simple cell that's going through this process. That's super quick. And then three, in stable environments, genetically identical offspring thrive. There's not going to be a huge change in this environment where having some unique offspring is going to be beneficial. If this is a stable environment, you know that this offspring is going to survive. It's a lot easier to reproduce asexually. It's an advantage because it's easier. Now, the other type of reproduction is sexual reproduction. And in sexual reproduction, we get an offspring from the fertilization of gametes, which if you remember, we just talked about gametes. We create gametes through the process of meiosis. Now we have two things to talk about here. We have gametogenesis. This is the production of haploid cells called gametes used in sexual reproduction. We get these gametes through the process of meiosis. Haploid cells are cells produced with half the required genetic information for the organism. Remember, we start with a diploid cell and we end up with a haploid cell. Fertilization is when these two gametes fuse together, so you have 1/2 plus 1/2 equals a whole. So we create a haploid and a haploid. Those come together to create a diploid cell, a cell with full genetic material, not just half of it. So a diploid cell has all of the genetic material needed. So let's think, what are some advantages to sexual reproduction? Why would an organism go through this very complicated process? We just had to learn it, super complicated. Why would they do that? What kind of organisms participate? What kind of environment would they be in? In an environment that changes a lot, like the deserts where it's really hot or really cold or super windy, in a changing environment, having unique, genetically different offspring can be very beneficial. Your offspring might be better for that new environment than you are, which means that your species continues. And that's the goal. The goal is to pass on genetic information. And if they survive and can pass on their genetic information, you've done a great job. Also, genetically unique offspring are produced. That's a huge advantage because you start creating a better fit species. In the same mindset, disease is less likely to affect all individuals of a population. So if you have genetically unique offspring, then if there's a disease that hits, some offspring might survive, and that's a really good thing. So let's take a look at this life cycle of a fern, because ferns are super interesting because they do both asexual and sexual reproduction. It's super fascinating. In your notes, you're going to identify when cells are haploid, and they are haploid in the spores, and diploid, and they are diploid in the mature fern plant. So my diploid mature fern plant creates these spores that are haploid, and that spore starts to grow. So that's a haploid individual, 1N. And then it continues to grow as a heart-shaped plant. So this individual is haploid, or 1N. And then the sperm and egg, which are both haploid, combine together to create, through fertilization, so this is where fertilization occurs, they create a diploid fern plant starting to grow here. Meiosis produces the spores. Mitosis is where this fern plant grows to become a mature fern plant. Remember, we go through mitosis to grow and develop, and that's what's happening there. When it's growing, we're going through mitosis. So in your notes, you are going to identify the haploid and diploid, mitosis, meiosis, and fertilization. So let's think, why would a fern go through both asexual and sexual reproduction? And it's because sometimes, if the environment changes rapidly, you still have another way to reproduce. It's beneficial for this. Start thinking about other organisms that could maybe produce both asexually and sexually, and why is that a good thing? And so we have an example here, the curious case of these carpet sharks in kinship. This shark gives a virgin birth, so it's one organism producing an offspring. And what's interesting here is that typically these sharks produce sexually. There was no male in the tank to fertilize the egg, and they still created an offspring. So what's happening here? What's going on? It's called parthenogenesis. Parthenogenesis. And I can move over to the other side so you can see how that's pronounced. Parthenogenesis is when you clone. You produce genetic asexually. So you are a sexual, typically, organism, but you produce asexually. This happens in some other vertebrate species as well, like reptiles and amphibians. It has not been observed in mammals yet. These are called virgin births because it's one organism producing an offspring. All right, so let's compare asexual and sexual reproduction. What's going on here? How can we compare these two? And you are going to fill this out in your notes. Asexual reproduction is probably a fast speed. Typically, asexual reproduction does not need mates. It has low resource diversity and low genetic diversity. Versus sexual reproduction is a slow process. You do need to find a mate, but the benefit is that it creates high resource diversity and high genetic diversity. That is all I have for you guys today. I'm going to send it back to regular Miss Judd. Thank you, Miss Judd in the corner. You're so helpful. Always. It's wild. Well, that actually wraps up today's lesson about asexual and sexual reproduction. Make sure you take a picture of your notes and you upload them to Seesaw. And that wraps up Unit 2 about cell types and cell division. Great job. Give yourself a little pat on the back because you earned it. You've just learned so much information, and I am so proud of you. You guys have a great day and make good choices.